for this hour of Are Your Business Payments Safe with Christian Olenowski from Paymerang and Cole Whiting from Hawkins School in Ohio. I'm Mary Menacho, Executive Director at Isaacs, and joined today by Karen Zeitlin and Jacob Isaac from Isaacs, and also by Jody Serval from Paymerang. So we're delighted to have you with us today. You've entered with your microphone muted, and there'll be time for questions. We'll welcome you to post those either in chat or to come off mic and just ask your question in person, because we're going to be a relatively intimate group today. This session will be recorded and available to you afterwards within 48 hours, but the team at Isaacs, they're usually on it faster than that. Let's see, if we invite you to post in the chat where you're coming from. Also, you can name yourself or rename yourself in your little Zoom square. So just a little bit about Christian. Christian has been working with Paymerang since December 2019 and manages the Paymerang's independent school branch. And Cole Whiting is business manager he's director of finance at Hawkins School and has been there since May of 2018. Listen, Christian and Cole, we're delighted to have you with us today to talk about risks to schools and how to mitigate those, and really interested in not only your presentation, Christian, but then hearing from you, Cole, about how it's actually working at your school. So with all those good things in mind, and promise not to give legal or medical advice here to everybody, but plenty of good business insights, I hope, we'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
Can everybody hear Christian?
We cannot hear Christian.
Okay. Christian,
oh, there we go. Can you all just give me a thumbs up real quick? You can see my screen.
Yeah.
Thumbs up. Yeah.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, I just was hit with the most used line of 2020. Christian, you're on mute. So great way to start the day. My name is Christian Olenowski. I'm the Vice President of Independent Schools here at Paymerang, based in Richmond, Virginia. Excited to chat with you all about, one of your favorite things to talk about is business payment security and fraud. So that's going to be the topic of conversation today. Thank you, Cole, for joining me and being, giving some of your insights on how Paymerang has helped benefit your school and some of the processes you all have in place. So for today's agenda, we're going to start off with some key threats to payment fraud, going through and talking about the 4 layers of protection available to your organization. And then from there, we're going to go through some practical steps that you can take at your school and put in place to help put your business office in the most secure environment possible. So starting off here, the couple current events, or I guess not as current as they were last year, but the first one here, the Washington's unemployment fraud scam. So 2 weeks after the revelations of a massive fraud scheme that briefly shut down Washington's unemployment system, state officials acknowledged that the scale of the theft was probably between $550 and $650 million, of which was about one of $8 paid out during the pandemic. Of that sum, the state recovered about $33 million from the Employment Security Department. The efforts of the fraud scandal slowed down legitimate unemployment claims in the state of Washington. So really frustrating scenario there. The Forbes example here, more than 2,000 victims lost money through fake goods sold online, cold calling, text messages, and other types of fraud, which enabled people to report themselves as victims of cybercrime or fraud. One type of cold call that was reported is for people who are claiming to be calling to help fix an IT device or a device or an IT problem. Other types of fraud have included those people who are most vulnerable to have self-isolated or paying for their online shoppings, which did not then arrive. Nearly 12,000 victims were victims of phishing or smishing scams, which are emails perpetrating to be someone else in a bid to get receipts to send them to send payment. The last example here, $75,000 in checks were stolen from a postal worker and were deposited into various bank accounts, often the same day before the checks were reported stolen. So really not much you could do if the checks were cashed before they were reported stolen. A very, very staggering statistic, and this is really why this is the main topic of conversation today. 81% of organizations were targets of either actual or attempted business fraud in 2019. And the one that we're really going to be mainly talking around today is business email compromise. So a couple more events here. Zoom Corporation is an international money transfer organization based in California. Zoom reported an incident where spoofed emails were sent to the company's finance department. This resulted in a $30.8 million in corporate cash being transferred from their account to fraudulent overseas accounts. The CFO resigned, and the company's audit committee authorized an independent investigation by outside advisors. The company has implemented additional security procedures, and federal law enforcement are actively pursuing a multi-agency criminal investigation. Because of this, the company's stock dropped 14%, or approximately $31 million. The second one here, Ubiquity Networks, is a wireless networking technology company based in San Jose, California. This is probably the one that you all will see the most in your schools or your organization. The company reported an attack targeting company finances involving both employees and executive impersonations. This attack was initiated by a company subsidiary in Hong Kong, resulting in a transfer of $46.7 million to third-party bank accounts. Once alerted, the company recovered $8.1 million and then an additional $6.8 million. It's still in the process of recovering $31.8 million. So, you know, a huge blow to that organization financially. And then the last one here, another great example of ones that you would likely see within your school. This is Mattel is a toy making company based in the United States. This particular fraud was a very sophisticated email phishing scam directed to finance executives who were able to approve large cash transfers. The cyber attackers conducted very thorough research beforehand on the senior management within the company. As a result, this enabled them to understand the corporate hierarchy and payment patterns. Because of the sophisticated nature of the attack, they were able to lure $3 million from Mattel to a bank in China. Mattel contacted the FBI as well as the bank in China, and as a result, the funds were returned. So really, you know, this last one here, the one with Mattel, is ones that you're going to see the most in your school, right? People impersonating emails, looking as if they are somebody within your organization, asking for things that probably are a little bit unusual. One that we get here at Paymerang all the time, we always get emails from our CEO claiming to be asking for a favor and asking for you to go purchase gift cards of some outrageous amount. I've learned our CEO never wants us to go buy iTunes gift cards and send them pictures of them. So Next part here, the 4 layers of protection available to you. The 4 layers here: protecting the payment, securing the operations, fortifying network, and then the last one is going to be locking down the compliance. So starting with locking down the payments, right? For the most part, I talk with schools all day, and I know that for the most part, most schools are paying a majority of their vendors using checks, right? That's pretty standard, paying your vendors by paper checks. If you get nothing out of this conversation today, and you think that this was you didn't learn anything, I would say the biggest takeaway for your school would be to talk to your banker about Positive Pay. If you're not familiar with what Positive Pay is, it's a program through your bank that essentially every time you do a check run, you send them a file that matches the check number, the amount, and the payee. What this does is it makes sure that no funds can be drawn off the account that shouldn't be. So if I'm sending a check to Isaac's for $3,000, that means that check number 123 can only be cashed by Jacob at Isaac's with his signature. So there is a cost associated with Positive Pay with your bank, but it's going to be a very minimal cost for for a risk management standpoint. The next way here, ACH payments. ACH payments are an electronic payment transfer method from your bank to another bank. If you are doing ACH payments, making sure that you're doing it in the most secure manner possible, preferably with a third party. Why we suggest doing it through a third party is you're not storing any of that banking information within any of your systems. As we've seen in the past with different accounting softwares or different organizations being hacked and leaking data, right? If you were a victim of some sort of attack like that, you wouldn't want to be storing those vendors' banking information within your accounting software. So making sure that if you are doing ACH payments, doing it through some sort of third party that is encrypted and secure. Virtual cards. If you are making credit card payments within your school, we highly recommend using virtual cards. The reason for this is they're single use. They're preloaded with the amount for the payment that you're going to make, so that your vendor can't save that number to your account.
Oh, I think Christian's audio may have disconnected for a second. Looks like he's trying to pop back in.
So if you want, I can comment on a couple things while
Yeah,
Christian's
Cole,
connected.
that'd be
Thanks so
wonderful. Thank you.
Excuse me. So I arrived at Hawkins School in May of 18, and before I got there, the school was not using Positive Pay or ACH payments. Now we use Paymerang now, so automatically we're enrolled in that. But before we started with Paymerang, we did do a rollout of ACH payments for employee reimbursements internally. We use Blackbaud as our financial reporting software, and they have a module for that. At any rate, it really helped us with, we had a lot of employees that they would hold their checks. So they would get reimbursement and they would hold it for 6 to 12 months. And you'd have that check on your outstanding checklist, or you'd have to put it through S-Cheat. So that really helped. And the Positive Pay is, it's actually not very complicated at all. There's a very simple process of getting your export file set up to import into the bank, and it's highly recommended and definitely worth the cost. When you think about somebody somehow getting a check out of your system and trying to cash it for $10,000 or $20,000 or much larger amounts than that, and it won't work. You know, it's the bank will simply just reject it. And if it does come through, like we've had some checks that we voided in the system, and then a vendor tried to cash that check after it was voided, and you get a notification, you can still allow that check to be paid if you choose to, but you can also deny it. So it's a pretty nice feature.
Awesome. Thank you, Cole. I apologize. My phone just cut out and dropped me off the call. So the last one here is just procedures, right? I know really most organizations are really locking down the payments, have multiple levels of approvals, maybe single payment limits, knowing that only certain people within the school can approve payments for a certain amount, right? Just having those procedures in place to make sure these payments are validated. Another thing would be engaging your vendors with any sort of changes, right? If your vendor reaches out to you and say, we've had an address change, how are you verifying that information? Making sure you're calling the vendor and making sure they're saying who it is, right? What we've seen over these last 12 months, if anything, is a rise in vendor impersonation. People saying they are somebody who you think that they are not someone who they are saying they are. So, you know, people just trying to impersonate your vendors, try to collect your payments, and just making sure you're verifying the information using things like a previous invoice amount or invoice number. Just some things that we've done within our organization to make sure we're verifying vendor changes to make these payments securely. So step one, protecting the payment. Layer number two, securing the environment. Making sure that the first one here, all payment data needs to be protected in an environment where payments are being processed, right? Doing a bunch of little things, right? I like to view this conversation as really like compounding interest, right? The more little things you do, right, the greater impact it's going to have on your school or your organization. So using a combination of things like clean desk policy, removing all payment information once or from your office view, and then using certified shredding services. So securing the environment is the first way. Fraud detection, to detect fraudulent payments and ensure that only legitimate payments are made. Kind of like I was saying on the last step here, securing the payment, making sure that you're verifying any changes with these vendors, making sure that if there's any changes on your account, verifying why. Knowing that the invoice is coming from who you think it is really a small step that can make a big difference. Training, right? I really cannot harp on this enough. To be very honest, right? I never worked in payments. I didn't know really anything about electronic payments before I came to Paymerang. I didn't really know anything about risk management or security, right? But I've been here for over 2.5 years now, and just learning and constantly. One of the things that our company does a fantastic job of is constantly training and educating our organization on what's changing within this space. What things are we seeing arising, right? We have grown our fraud department. So we have somebody who really does all the investigation on anything that we think could possibly be fraud. And she's educating our entire company on these things so we can see these trends. Also, we have ongoing security trainings that we're doing bi-weekly to help educate our employees on some things that might look fishy or smell fishy. They're probably fishy. So we're not only educating our payments department, but the entire organization, because, you know, as I'm going to talk about later, cross-training is going to be huge for this. And then procedures to ensure that operational controls are present throughout the payments process, right? I know that most schools have a dual signature policy on checks over X amount, right? Making sure that you have those payment limits and segregation of duties, making sure that the person who's preparing the checks is not the person who's signing for them, right? Just the little things, like I said, compounding interest. Cole, anything that you maybe want to add here that you all have done within your school to protect the environment, or excuse me, the operations?
Sure. I think that it, you know, what's really helped us is with the vendor verification process, you know, and your enrollment specialists. So when we get a new vendor and we're paying them through the system, on occasion I'll go in and check the payment file, and there's it may have not processed through Paymerang as fast as I might have expected it. So there's been a couple occasions through the learning process, I double checked and said, hey, what's going on with this file? And they said, well, we're working on enrolling some of your new vendors, so that's why it's not processing right now. What the Paymerang enrollment specialist will do is they'll contact the vendor independent of us and verify all that information, and then also ask what type of payments that they might accept. So if we were paying somebody by check, maybe Paymerang can convince them to take credit card or ACH. And I think that's helped out a lot. Also, with our system, you know, the levels of the security rules that you can set up in the system are helpful. So.
Awesome, thank you. So next step here, fortifying the network. Right? I know that none of us here, or probably most of us here, are not technology experts. So this might be a little bit foreign language, but really, you know, minimal things that, you know, you could do to help protect yourself. So endpoint protection, right? This simple way of this antivirus software, making sure that you're protecting your endpoint so that maybe if you do click on something you're not supposed to, it's not completely locking down your computer, and it's you know, it allows you to only run trusted softwares. So endpoint protection, a very small thing can make a big difference. I'm going to skip over vulnerability management and come back to that because it is a good talking point. Email defenses. This reduces the amount of unsafe emails that are able to come in. So we have a system called Barracuda that essentially anytime an email looks fishy, it smells fishy, maybe there's an attachment on there that I wasn't expecting, it's going to go directly into our spam folder. And it's a little quarantine that you can pull the email out if you'd like, but it's just an extra layer of protection that makes sure that if that email is not supposed to get through, it's not going to get through. And sometimes there might be an email or two that goes into our quarantine, but you can check on those things to make sure that you're not missing something that you're supposed to miss, or you're not supposed to miss, excuse me. Threat protection, right? To determine specific actions being attempted to carry out against the payment system, right? Like I've touched on in, you know, verifying vendor information, right? I don't want to give specific examples, but you know, we have seen a rise, right? Every school across the country, you could probably point to 5 just around your area, that every time they do a large capital campaign, it's everywhere, right? It's on their social media, it's on their website, it's on their email blast that they're sending out to alumni and trustees, right? It's open that you're trying to build new or do construction projects on campus. Hackers or people who are trying to get your money are aware of this, right? They're doing their research, they're doing their due diligence, right? They're going to try to reach out and try to compromise the payments process and try to pull in money from schools that are doing these things, right? Because it's such public knowledge that you're doing these things. So, right, just making sure that you're taking action on these specific suspicious vendors or activity. And then vulnerability management, right? Talking with schools all day, I know one thing that you all do a great of is these internal audits, right? Auditing your procedures and practices, right? Looking at where your weak points are, your chinks in your armor, to say, maybe we can improve this process, or maybe we can tweak this, right? I know that independent schools do a very good job of this with doing these internal audits and vulnerability management to exploit those weaknesses. So I don't really have to harp too much on that, but really, I think that is very important. And then last but not least, locking down the compliance, right? This is any former auditors in the group here, your ears are ringing right now with this section. right? Locking down compliance. We'll start with NACHA. NACHA is the National ACH Clearinghouse, and this ensures that all automated payment processes and procedures are in a trusted and controlled environment. So when you're processing ACH payments, you want to make sure that you're doing it at the highest level of security possible, right? Having things like multi-factor authentication and having it in a stored, secure, and encrypted environment that nobody else can get into for your vendor's banking information. At Paymerang, I'll tell you one thing that we do to keep ourselves NACHA compliant is none of our employees can see or change any of our vendors' banking information. The vendor actually has to go within our system and log into our vendor management portal to change that on their own. So NACHA compliant. PCI. If credit cards are being processed or transmitted within your organization, you have to be PCI compliant. So implementing PCI compliance to ensure that cardholder data is stored and maintained in a secure environment. So if you're storing payments, right, maybe people who are doing recurring payments and you're storing their credit card information to automatically bill them on the 5th of every month, right, need to make sure that you're storing that in a secure environment. OFAC, right? OFAC is the Office of Foreign Assets and Controls. Just kind of by show of hands, thumbs up, has anybody even heard of OFAC before? I didn't expect so. OFAC is the Office of Foreign Assets and Controls, and what this is the U.S. Department of Treasury program, and this is a list of businesses and individuals that the U.S. government suspects of funding terrorist activity as well as money laundering. So we bounce our list of several 100,000 vendors off of the OFAC list on a weekly basis. And the reason we do this is to ensure that none of our clients are paying anybody that they shouldn't be. Not only is it a huge reputational risk, but fines are very, very significant, averaging almost $500,000 for the first fine. While it is very, very, very seldom that we even have a flag when we do run our clients or our vendors through the OFAC list, it is good to make sure that, right, we are doing our due diligence, and maybe those false negatives are better than nothing. So making sure that you're not paying any vendors on the OFAC list. And then SOC 2. I'm sure most of you are familiar with SOC audits. From most of your auditors are going to suggest or recommend that all of the vendors that you do business with are either SOC 1 or SOC 2. We fall in line with the SOC 2 audits because we're not doing anything in terms of financial reporting, so we don't fall in the SOC 1. SOC 2 is an audit in terms of practices and procedures, in terms of managing and transmitting data within the software as a service industry. And we give a full copy of all of our audit reports to all of our clients on an annual basis so that when their auditor comes around, it makes their life a little bit easier. Ironically, Cole and I were talking through this yesterday, and I said, how did this kind of help your audit? And I'll kind of let him talk on that because so Cole, you want to just kind of share it? And I know it's not the answer that everyone's looking for, but it is.
So talk about kicking the can down the road. So I used to be a former auditor, and when we were onboarding with Paymerang, it was in the spring of last year. Oh, by the way, I might have been busy, so it took me almost a year to actually make the commitment. Christian is so patient. I think we started talking in 2019, and I didn't finally finish anything until like April of 2020. So at any rate, we finally completed the onboarding process, and we made our first payment through Paymerang in May. And knowing that the audit was coming up after June 30th, I told everybody in the AP department, I said, okay, that was great. We were successful. Now stop. I said, we're not doing anything else until July so that we don't have to change any of our documentation with our walkthroughs and explain to the auditors. And, you know, every year you get a freshman auditor that you have to walk through every single process. So I said, we'll just wait. That next year we can get the SOC report, we can get the gap letter, we'll be all set.
Great. Kristen, do you want to take a question from Sherry Krebsbach? Sherry, you want to come off and ask your question?
Sorry, I didn't have a question. I was just responding to the OFAC comment.
Oh, it was a high five. Okay, sorry.
I think there's a question from Ashley though in the chat. Do you see that, Christian?
Yes. How do you prevent someone from hacking vendor profile from changing their banking details? That's a good question. So, number one, right, they have to have that they have to have that vendor's specific account information, right? So if they, right, similar to really any login, right? But the big thing is multi-factor authentication. The vendors have to have a email and phone number on file. So maybe they do hack it, right? Maybe they do get that vendor's login information. They're still going to have that phone number that they have on file to be able to pick up that phone call or get that automated text message to be able to confirm that they are who they say they are to be able to log in. So simple answer would be multi-factor authentication for logging in for any of those vendor changes. So last thing here is just kind of talking about some practical steps that you could take. Right, I like to call this our webinar one-pager. Right, this is, if you were taking anything home with you, this is really all that. This is your cheat sheet for the day. So, right, some practical steps that you could take on the payment side. Right, I said it at the beginning. Positive pay. This should be the number one thing that you circle if you haven't heard of it. If you haven't had these conversations in the past, highly suggest looking into positive pay with your bank. For credit card payments, making sure you're using one-time cards and using and encrypting account information. Verifying vendors before making changes. Limiting employee access and then requiring approvals for these changes. Operations, right? Starting with a clean desk policy. If there's nothing on your, within the environment for people to see or take, then, you're better off. Utilize shredding services, verifying changes, assigning fraud scores, sending suspicious links or fraudulent emails to your IT department to make sure they do the investigation. Having payment limits, multiple levels of approvals, segregation of duties, just some different things here. Fortifying the network antivirus software, software patching, making sure that you're doing expert penetration testing to see where those chinks are in your armor, multi-factor authentication, and then just making sure your compliance is locked down, making sure that you're NACHA compliant. Right? The last big thing here that I would say, if there's a key takeaway, is that second bullet point under compliance. Do not store banking data if you can avoid doing so. Making sure that you're PCI compliant for securing cardholder data. SOC 2 for all the vendors that are doing anything with your data. And then OFAC, knowing your vendors and knowing where your vendors, where your money is going. Next steps, really, just kind of want to open the floor for questions or comments for not only myself, but, just want to give, before I do open the floor for questions, want to kind of open the floor for Cole and talk about some of the experiences that he's had, how it's made his school more secure, and really, we had a great conversation of why Hawken was a really good fit to start partnering with Paymerang. So would love for you to kind of share some of your story as well, Cole.
So Cole, you got to unmute.
I love when that happens. Thank you. So at any rate, I've got a couple screens working. So if I look over here and there, at least you'll know what's going on. Like we said earlier, I've been with Hawken since May of 2018. I'm pretty reliant on systems versus manual processes. So as the years have gone by, we've tried to attack a certain area or process here and there and try to make it as efficient as possible. One of the reasons, just to tell you a little bit about Hawken, if you're not familiar, Hawken is located in the Cleveland area, and currently it's a coeducational private day school with 4 campuses. The upper school is in Gates Mills, Ohio. The lower and middle school is in Lyndhurst, Ohio. In 2016, Hawken merged with the Birchwood School to become the Birchwood School of Hawken, and that's located on Cleveland's west side. And then last year, in the fall, Hawken opened a mastery school in University Circle, Ohio. So our campuses are spread apart. So with all of this change, for approximately 10 years prior to the merger with Birchwood, Hawken's enrollment fluctuated from 950 to 1,000 students per year on the 2 campuses in Lyndhurst and Gates Mills. Our projected enrollment for 2021-22 is expected to exceed 1,500 students. So that's a dramatic growth in the last few years. Our accounts payable process is decentralized, so there's a number of invoices that are sent to the business office directly, and then a large portion are also sent directly to budget managers, which approve and code the invoices, and then send them to the business office to be paid. So before we implemented Paymerang, the business office would process on average 4,000 check payments per year, which equates to about $12 to $13 million. We were also processing AP twice a week. Because of the change to Paymerang, we were allowed to, or we used it as a good excuse to only process AP once a week. So we've been with Paymerang since, like I said, since May, but we really started using Paymerang in July of 2020. So if you take a snapshot of the activity from July of 2020 to the end of the year, so the first 6 months, our accounts payable activity is actually down about 30% compared to pre-pandemic periods. We processed about 1,350 payments, and we would have expected to process 2,000 payments. And one of the reasons is because we're only processing AP once a week instead of twice a week. And then also with the pandemic, we just have less invoices or check requests coming in. We have been very successful with transitioning approximately 90% of our vendor payments to Paymerang. The remaining 10% would be for like local vendors that are small amounts that need payment very quickly. You know, they need a check today, so it's not going to be possible to send a file to Paymerang and then have them be paid today. The other example would be some of our special programs or sports related activity. If there's registration for a speech and debate tournament, or, you know, a swimming, you know, we made it to state championships, and for the swimming team, if they need a check. With respect to the Paymerang payments that we made in the first 6 months, I think it was over 1,200 payments made, and there's a certain rebate that you get for credit card payments made to vendors through Paymerang. It all depends on what your vendor makeup is, on who takes ACH or credit cards or checks. And Paymerang will they do a great job of calling the vendors, or if we scan and email them an invoice, they'll take the data off the invoice and they'll try and contact the vendor and ask them if they'll take a different form of payment. So with Hawken, we received over $8,000 in rebates for the first 6 months. That was tremendous. And we knew it was a good idea to switch to Paymerang for various reasons, but the rebate was just a bonus. Now, we had some large construction payments in that first 6 months, so we're not expecting to see that type of rebate every year. Some other benefits with using Paymerang is that when you transition to the ending point of the AP process with Paymerang, you'll upload a payment file to Paymerang and you'll fund that with a wire transfer. So in that payment file, you could have any number of payments. I think we average between 50 and 75 payments a week. So instead of reconciling 50 to 75 checks, you have one wire transfer that you have to reconcile, which is pretty easy when you're doing the bank rec. You also have the benefit that Paymerang handles all the reconciling of those outstanding checks for you. So if the check doesn't clear, I think it's like in 60 days, they'll send the money back to you, and then you can reach out to the vendor and ask, you know, why didn't you cash the check? It also helps with a lower number of checks to review annually for unclaimed funds. And then I think I touched on one of the benefits with the additional fraud protection is that the way that Paymerang interacts with the vendors independently of the school. Did you want me to talk about the implementation process at all, Christian?
Yeah, and Cole, I'd also like you to talk a little bit about the decision-making process, kind of what that looked like. And I have another question for you too.
Sure. So when I got to the school in May, you know, the audit was right around the corner. So we had to close a few months and then get ready for the audit. So that was 18. So come a year later, I think everything's fine. I can't remember what happened, but something blew up. So I finally started talking to Christian, and I'm like, well, I'd really like to do this, but so every time he'd send me an email, I'm like, well, I'm sorry, I'm too busy. And every time we would talk internally. So Sam Steinhaus is the CFO at Hawkins School, and we would always say, this is a great idea. We really need to do this. This is going to help with improving efficiencies, and we'll get some, you know, some added miscellaneous income to help the budget. You know, it just made sense. So finally, in March and April of 2020, we finally decided, you know, well, the pandemic hit. If we're not going to do, I mean, if there's any good reason to do this, this is the reason why. We really don't want as many people in the office right now to be touching all this paper and to be around each other. This just makes it so much easier. So there wasn't a tremendous change in the AP process on the front end, but the back end was very helpful. So we don't have to mail any checks anymore. I don't have to physically sign a check anymore. Sam doesn't have to make sure he's there to be a double signer. We figured out a different way for the approval process to ensure that he is a second author. You know, he is authorizing a payment over $10,000 because it's included in the batch. So when we generate our wire transfer, it requires two people to authorize that. So that's the second signature. We're actually looking at Paymerang's front end of the AP process, and in that action, we may actually change some things around where we would both approve invoices for payment on the front end, and then on the back end, we would still have dual approval, but at least each individual invoice would be documented with dual approval. So really, we knew it was the right thing to do. It was just a matter of getting some time, and the pandemic was the push.
Well, I guess I have another question also, and that is, you know, what you've so nicely described, Cole, is how this is working for a large institution like Hawken. And I'm wondering about, you know, scale, just at what point, either for you, Christian, or for you, Cole, at what point does this kind of system make sense for a school? Is there a budget amount?
No, so really, you know, why our organization has made such an impact on independent schools. The average size of a business office across the country is 2.5 employees, 2.5 full-time employees for the average business office across America. Therefore, really, most schools can see an impact from using this program, because even if they save an hour of time or 2 hours of time a week, it's going to put time back into somebody's day that they can go focus on other tasks, right? Well, AP is something that is unnecessary evil, right? It's something that needs to be done and something that does in fact take up time, right? You shouldn't be spending time printing checks and signing them and stuffing envelopes and licking stamps to get them to go on the envelope, right? It should be as easy as upload a file, pay the bills, and you're done. And that's why we've really seen, you know, we have clients with, you know, as little as 100 students, and we have clients with over 2,500 students. So very long-winded answer, but the simple answer would be really most organizations or schools can see an impact from implementing a program like this.
Great, thanks. That is helpful. So I'd like to open it up to our audience, questions that you have. Maybe every question has been answered.
At this point, Christian, do you want to go ahead and stop sharing your slide, and we can see more of everybody who's in the room, and maybe that'll help be a more conversational. Maybe we can get some more questions.
Yeah, so I would just encourage anybody, if you have a curiosity, don't worry about, oh, this is a question I should know the answer to, or we can just be curious with each other for a few minutes here. It's perfectly fine.
So while we're waiting, I will jump in and talk about the actual implementation process. So I think I would hope that everybody's gathered that I'm usually extremely busy and don't have much time for anything, right? And I'm sure that's what everybody feels like in the room. Like, how do you have time for this? I don't have time to implement a new process. So for us, I think that Paymerang may have quoted that it would take us 10 hours of time from the day that we said we were going to start to the day that we actually finished, and with our onboarding and the go live date. And I don't even know if it was that long. You have to you'll get a enrollment specialist or implementation specialist, and ours was Sarah Schmerl. She was amazing, and I think they've since promoted Sarah out of that position because she's that good. At any rate, they'll help you create this vendor file, which is going to be an export file from your system to import into Paymerang, and that will load all of your current vendors. The other, I mean, that's one step. So you create this file, you talk to your implementation specialist. There's some scrubbing that you have to do. You get that in the system, and then the next step is to configure your payment file, which you'll run every week and export from your system and import to Paymerang. Other than that, there's there's an ACH form, there's a couple other forms you have to sign, there's the contract, and then you have to set up your user roles with security. I mean, it's surprisingly simple. Now, in fairness, I do not own stock in Paymerang, so there's no real benefit for me to be saying things that may not be true here. So, and I'm a former auditor and a Boy Scout, so I wouldn't lie to you.
Love it. Thank you, Cole.
Sure.
Looks like there's a question from Ellen. Did that get already addressed? I'm so sorry.
Yes. Yep.
No.
So just address that. For those that didn't see, Ellen asked, how broadly is Positive Pay utilized? Is this going to be familiar to my banker? Simple answer is yes. Right? Most financial institutions offer Positive Pay as a service. I would say 99% of even your local small regional banks will still offer Positive Pay.
Great. Well, that's an extremely practical takeaway for everybody on the call if they're not already doing that. Great. Anything else? This is going to be like a last call here. You got something you're curious about? And we'll turn it over to Chris and to Cole for some closing remarks.
Well, really all I want to say is I appreciate everyone joining us this afternoon, or yeah, I guess it's afternoon now. And you know, taking the time to really talk about something that's not really cool or fun or sexy, but it is something that's out there, right? We need to have payment fraud and business security at the top of mind. So I appreciate you all joining me this afternoon. And again, Cole, thank you for your help as well.
Sure. And I would just say that if anybody has any questions that they, you know, didn't think of during this call and they want to reach out to me after, I'm more than happy to take some time and talk. I was scouring a different chat room service the other day for people about other things, and I chewed on, I think, 3 or 4 different CFO and controllers' ears about things, and they were kind enough to spend some time with me. So if you have a question, I'd be more than happy to talk to you.
Oh, thank you, Cole. That's such a great thing about our community and our industry, is that we can share good resources and good practices with each other. So I really appreciate your leadership. I appreciate your willingness to be on the call with us today, and certainly Christian as well. Thank you for everything that you've shared, and Jody for getting us here and making it all work. So with that, we'll be signing off a little bit early, giving everybody a few minutes back in their day. Thanks so much for being with us, and we'll see you on the next call. All right, bye for now.